That's the equivalent of a $3,000 tax cut. And just this week, the Pentagon announced that if these cuts go through, almost 800,000 defense employees, the equivalent of every person in Miami and Cleveland combined, will be forced to take an unpaid leave.
Also reduce harmful carbon pollution by 24,000 tons per year, which is the equivalent of removing 4,000 cars from our roads.
If we can do the equivalent of insulating some windows and making the house more efficient, you're still going to be warm, you're just going to be able to save some money.
Over the next 3 decades, the clean energy from this plant will save 575,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which is the equivalent of removing more than 4,500 cars from the road each year for the life of the project.
And the yellow light starts flashing. The yellow light is flashing. Now,
Secretary Duncan, who's the equivalent in the...
There are the equivalent of 250 full-time workers as a consequence of the project that's taking place here. If Congress fails to act, more than 7 million students will suddenly be hit with the equivalent of a $1,000 tax. In the words of one former senator, having Lou on your team is the equivalent as a coach of having the luxury of putting somebody at almost any position and knowing he will do well. And I could not agree more. It's not like the equivalent of the U.S.
So for the Americans in the audience, that's the equivalent of 30 million refugees crossing into the United States, with a possibility of that going up to 60 million by the end of the year, relative obviously to our populations.
Somebody was explaining to me that I guess one of the wafers was being cleaned, and they said this would be the equivalent. It was Alex who told me this. Alex is around here somewhere. Be the equivalent of if you were mowing the south lawn, but every blade of grass was exactly cut at the same height within a single human hair. So I know these standards don't sound all that sexy, but think of it this way. That's the equivalent of planting 7.6 billion trees and letting them grow for 10 years, all while doing the dishes. It can end up being the equivalent of a $3,000 tax cut, basically, money in your pocket, or alternatively, as Andrew was talking about, it gives homeowners an opportunity to start building back some of the equity in the home that they lost during the Great Recession. He had come back, wanted to continue to pursue his career and become a professional nurse, and he was having to start from scratch, taking the equivalent of Nursing 101. So over the past year, the failure of Congress to act was the equivalent of a $200 pay cut for these folks, for a typical minimum wage worker.
You already informed us in the G7 meeting and just today that there are licenses already given that in fact are equivalent to the supply of gas to Europe, but they are traded in the global market.
Students with a technical degree equivalent that gives them a head start. So we're asking schools to look into what the Department of Energy is putting a new efficiency standard, a set of efficiency standards in place that could save businesses billions of dollars in energy costs and cut carbon pollution. And it's the equivalent of taking about 80 million cars off the road.